If there was one statement to describe my first experience with the Galaxy S23 Plus, I would say that based on my first use, this phone is going to be underrated, underappreciated, and it's going to be the most well-polished phone in 2023. Now, if you guys didn't know, I routinely spoke about how I thought that the Galaxy S22 Plus was one of the best, most underappreciated phones of last year, and based on my first impressions with the Galaxy S23 Plus, it's basically the same great phone that reminded me of the past generation, but also has a few improvements here and there that makes it a pretty good upgrade. The S23 Plus has an incredible software that runs really well and is effortlessly smooth. It has a really great flat edge display that, just like the S23 Ultra, is holding up very well. Scrolling through this phone is incredibly smooth with no lags whatsoever. It has a great build quality that not only feels premium but also durable, and it has the very powerful Snapdragon Gen 2 chip that can handle any app that you throw at it. And even though there are many things that I loved about the Galaxy S23 Plus based on my first impression, I will tell you guys that it's not perfect, and there were some little nitpicks here and there that I wanted to point out. But overall, it's still a solid phone, and I wanted to share my experience to give you guys some insight on how the Galaxy S23 Plus is in real life. Now, when it comes down to pricing of the S23 Plus, unlike last year's S22 Plus, the storage starts at 256 gigs, which has a starting price of $999 before tax. And then you have the 512 gigabyte version, which costs around $1,100, which is very close to the S23 Ultra. And this was one of my biggest problems surrounding the S23 Plus. I wish Samsung would have included a 128 gigabyte version with a starting price of around $900, because I feel like that's one of the reasons that Samsung's Plus lineup is so underrated and underappreciated. A lot of people aren't willing to spend over $1,000 for basically a bigger S23, especially when it's priced pretty close to the Ultra. And also, not many people need 256 gigs worth of storage, since 128 gigs satisfy a lot of people, including myself. Now, looking at colors, the S23 Plus has two different sets of colors, and this basically means that you have the primary colors like green, lavender, cream, and phantom black that are more common colors that are available in stores like Best Buy and all of the other major phone companies. And then you have the special Samsung colors like graphite and lime, which are colors that you can only get on Samsung's website, so they're basically special edition colors. And the version that I have is green, and as you can see right here, it has that very clean, minimalistic look. The darker tones give off that very rich military green, which complements the matte feel. You have the very transparent Samsung logo that's shiny, so it adds a little bit of depth. And it has inner gray rings wrapped around a green outer layer around the cameras, which makes it look even more uniform. Now, looking at the sides, they have a stainless steel finish with a dark undertone that still matches the back despite being a completely different material. And going over different buttons and ports, on the right side we have the volume rockers and power button, along with a 5G antenna. On the top there's a mic. On the bottom we have our speaker, USB-C port, along with extra mics, a SIM ejection tray, and it's pretty much the same layout as the S23 Ultra, with the only difference being that it doesn't have an S Pen. Now, when it comes to build quality, based on my first impressions, I would say that despite it having a huge frame, it's very light compared to other phones of its size. I decided to test out its weight compared to my S23 and S23 Ultra, and it was a little bit heavier than the S23, but not by much. And it was way lighter than the S23 Ultra, so when it comes to weight, it's perfectly in the middle of the two. Now, the front and back of the S23 Plus has Gorilla Glass Victus 2, which is an upgrade from last year's Victus Plus on the S22 Plus. And like I tell everyone, yes, this phone will survive a few drops, but how many drops completely depends on the surface. So if you drop it on a regular wood floor in a house, you pretty much can drop it a lot before you see any damage. But if you drop it on concrete, then you can notice a crack on the third or maybe even fourth drop. So I will say that if you're someone who drops your phone a lot, you're better off getting a case. Now, the S23 Plus is also IP68 dust and water resistant, so if you drop your phone in water or you go to the beach where there's a lot of sand, you won't really have a thing to worry about. Now, when it comes to overall frame, the S23 Plus feels very identical to the S22 Plus. The sides are a little bit more rounded, which creates a much more comfortable feel. You also have the flat display that makes the phone even easier to use since there's no accidental touches. Now, on a side note, the cameras on the S23 Plus have been smoothed out. Samsung decided to carry out the same aesthetic as the S23 Ultra, and I think that it makes the whole lineup look a lot more cleaner. Now, the S23 Plus has a 6.6-inch dynamic AMOLED display that has a refresh rate of 120 Hz, along with 1700 nits worth of peak brightness brightness, and based on my first impressions with the display, I would say that it looks, feels, and performs amazing as expected. And one of the first things that I noticed during my few days of using the S23 Plus is that it feels incredibly smooth. Whenever I was scrolling on social media or just through the general OS, setting up my home screen and settings, everything was very quick and snappy. And right here, I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison with the S23 Ultra and give you guys an idea of what I mean. Both the S23 Ultra and S23 Plus were very identical. Both were insanely fast and precise. And again, I wanted to show you guys how fast the S23 Plus is. Now, the 120Hz refresh rate made scrolling feel really smooth. Another thing that I noticed was that while scrolling through apps, there was no hiccups whatsoever. And you can also lower the refresh rate down to 60Hz for less smoother scrolling. Doing this will result in extra battery life, and I think it still looks pretty good. Now, just like every other phone in the S23 lineup, the bezels are basically non-existent. Right here, you can see that they're wrapped nicely around the screen. The hole punch camera is also very small, and I pretty much forgot it existed once I started using the phone. Now, when it comes to brightness, the S23 Plus is at 1750 nits max, which means that it's one of the brightest screens out of every other smartphone. I went outside to test it out, and I was able to see everything very clearly. Also, if you find yourself in a situation where the sun is beaming on you, you also have the option to put extra brightness, but this does use more battery. Now, the fingerprint scanner was really fast. I use it for passwords, Samsung Pay, and to unlock my phone. And overall, I don't remember a time where it would lag or couldn't read my finger, so I was pretty satisfied. Now, the facial recognition wasn't as good as the fingerprint scanner. Just like on my S23 Ultra, there was a lot of times where it would take longer to scan my face. There was also one time where it couldn't recognize my face at all, so I would just use the fingerprint scanner instead. Now, the resolution and viewing experience of the S23's display was easily one of my favorite things about this phone. Watching videos, scrolling through many different apps, and even playing games made it that much better. And I want to give you guys an idea of what the screen looks like by watching a video and playing a game.
Dennis just likes to get those DMV records as much as he can. Of course, you know that's real. This is Terrence Ross, who just acquired off waivers Wednesday from Orlando. This is his Phoenix debut tonight. Gets it to Aiden.
Now, the battery life based on my first day of use was pretty good. And even though it's pretty early to be talking about battery life, I wanted to share my first day with you guys while also sharing specs. Now, the S23 Plus has a 4700 mAh battery that on a spec sheet looks better than the S22 Plus. So I'm expecting some better battery life, and I will be showing you guys how it holds up in my day in the life review. The S23 Plus also supports 45 watt fast charging, which means that you can go from 0 to 100 in under an hour, meaning that if you do have to charge your phone during the day, you really won't have to wait long. And during my first day, I managed to get 6 hours of screen time. I ended my day with about 30% battery left, which could have lasted me deep in the night. And now, of course, it's too early to tell, but that was my first impression with the battery life. It's pretty good so far, but I need more time before I gather my final thoughts. Now, just like the S22 Plus, the S23 Plus has some really loud speakers that not only had great volume, but also great quality. A lot of phones' quality take a hit once you turn the volume all the way up, but the S23 Plus was able to keep that same consistent sound. I also tested out how they sounded when playing music, and again, the consistency was there. I liked the bass, the vocals were clear, and honestly, I had no complaints. I also tested out the S23 Plus as my alarm when I took my nap yesterday, and I had no problem waking up from it. I woke up on the first alarm and was pretty impressed with how loud it got, even though the music was annoying. And right here, I'm going to give you guys an idea of how the speakers sound.
That's a good feed into the Bryant, and he scores on the dish from D'Angelo Russell. We're squared up to the baseline. I harp on that a lot. All that's just an easy play to make. Kobe drains it again from the outside.
Now, the Galaxy S23 Plus has a 50 megapixel main camera, along with a 12 megapixel ultra wide and selfie camera, and a 10 megapixel telephoto. And based on my sample pics, I would say that the outside cameras are good, but just like the S23 Ultra, the selfies are hit or miss. And looking at regular pictures, they gave a lot of good vibrancy. It also handled low light situations very well, which I liked a lot. And even though the colors weren't as clean as the S23 Ultra, they still were pretty good. And one thing that I really loved about the S23 Plus's display was that every photo has a really great sharp look to it. I also liked the vibrancy whenever I took the picture outside, and I was amazed by how much colorful everything looked. It made me even more eager to take pictures of random things. Even the night shots were impressive as well. The added lighting gave pictures a nice touch of realism while also giving a much needed boost to the dull environment, and again, the sharpness was at its peak. Now, my biggest problem with the camera was the selfies. I don't know what it is, but for years, Samsung hasn't been able to capture my skin tone right. My skin on the S23 Plus is much lighter and I get a ghost type look, which makes me prefer other phones when taking selfies. And this isn't just a problem on the S23 Plus, it's a problem with most Samsung phones in general. Now when it comes to the video camera, the S23 Plus can shoot 720p all the way up to 8K, and when it comes to frame rate, it shoots 24, 30, and 60. Now I want to use the phone a little bit more before I give my final thoughts on the videos, so what I'm going to do is show you guys some video tests that I took in different environments. Now, based on my first impressions with the Galaxy S23 Plus, I think that it's a really great phone, but I also feel like it'll be underappreciated just like the S22 Plus. And the main reason why I think it will go underappreciated is because the price is so close to the S23 Ultra, and also because it's not marketed as well. But again, it's a really great phone that I think many people will enjoy. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I have 2 more videos on the S23 Plus coming out. The first one will be my day in the life review, and the next one will be my 1 week later review. So keep post notifications on and don't forget to subscribe. And I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Peace.